Hey everybody, it's Rick, back with you here at the layout in the basement. And I wanted to go over 6 tips that I have this week for starting your model railroad. The first is pick an era. Whatever that is, whatever it is that you like the most, pick that era. Whether it's steam, transition, uh, modern, whatever the case might be, pick an era and stick with it. I told you in one of my first videos I modeled the early 1940s, and I have reasons for modeling the 1940s. You should have reasons for why you're modeling what you decide to model. If it's, you were born in 1975 or 1980 or whatever the case might be. Maybe you were born in the 40s or 50s or whatever. And maybe that's what you want to model. Or maybe you think back to some time in your life where you were rail fanning and you saw something you really liked, or you have a picture of something that you really like. That's what you should probably model. It's something that got your interest. Okay, that's what this hobby is all about, anyway. Anyhow, that's what the hobby's all about, is portraying something that we love in our basements or in a spare bedroom or wherever you decide to put your model railroad. Uh, but for me, like I said, I chose the early 1940s. I was at the hobby store just the other day. I saw some really cool locomotives. They were modern, and I thought, you know what? If I buy that locomotive, all it's going to do is sit on a shelf. Um, or I was looking at freight cars, and I saw some freight cars that I really liked. I looked at them. I was looking at the freight cars. The first thing I always do when I'm in the hobby store is I look at the build date on the freight car. If the build date is after like 1945, somewhere around in there, I don't buy it. So it kind of saves me money while I'm at the hobby store to look at something and say, like, yeah, that doesn't fit in my era. You also can do the same thing with structures. If you look at structures in your local hobby store, if you look at the Walthers boxes, they all say right on them, is appropriate for all eras, or for steam era, or for transition, or for modern. And again, that will help you basically fulfill your niche and get you to where you need to be with your own railroad. Like I said, for me, that's the early 1940s. Whatever it is for you, decide what it is and stick with it. Now, I will tell you, sometimes I go to the hobby store and it's not the easiest thing to stick with that particular era, but that's what I end up doing. So, like I said, it gets me to save some money when I'm at the hobby store. If it's something that I'm looking for, whether it's a freight car, locomotive, structure, whatever the case might be, if it doesn't fit into my era, I just don't buy it. Which takes me to probably the second step of planning your railroad is decide what your budget is. Start to decide, like, are DCC locomotives in my budget, or are sound and DCC locomotives in my budget, or do I have some old stuff laying around in a box, like a lot of us do, that is strictly DC, and that's okay. It's better to model something than to model nothing. So if your budget doesn't include spending two, three, however many hundreds of dollars on sound-equipped DCC locomotives, then use what you can, use what you have, use what you can afford. Use whatever is in that budget. Um, Same thing goes with structures. Plan for everything you can think of: structures, locomotives, rolling stock, track. What I found, yeah, it takes a little bit more effort. The initial investment is probably a little bit more expensive than buying a couple turnouts or buying some flex track or whatever. But for me, when I did my budget, I kind of looked over some things and decided, you know what, I'm going to save money by hand laying my track. Sure, it takes more time, but there is something really satisfying about laying your own track. It's something I never thought I would do, but I am doing, and that's going to be one of my next videos, is how to hand lay track. Most of what I do is using track laying fixtures from Hand Laid Track. They're a wonderful company. They make some really nice Fast Tracks, it's called. They make some really nice fixtures that you can use to basically have consistent straight track or consistent turnouts and things like that that are ready for DCC if that's what you decide to do. Hey, if you want to buy Flex Track or if you want to buy turnouts, that's fine. Just make sure that that is factored into your budget. And what I do from time to time is I'm running a little, I run a business out of my house. I run a woodworking business. Some of the money that I make out of that business, I set aside for my railroad. When I have enough money to buy a structure or buy a locomotive, I take that money that I've saved and I go ahead and I go to the hobby store or go online or whatever and purchase that. Just something to think about, maybe every paycheck set aside $50 or $20 or whatever it is, have a little jar or something. I don't know. Whatever it is that you decide to do, save money for your hobby. After all, this is something that you evidently want to do. It's something you want to build. It's a lot of fun. Just look at some of the things that you spend money on and say, hey, you know what? I'd rather spend that 20 or 50 or 100 or whatever dollars on some stuff for my model railroad. And so that's generally speaking what I do. The next thing I think is important is pick a place. So you have an era and you have a place, okay? You can't decide to build, and you could, it's your railroad, which is something I'm going to talk about in a little bit, is, pick a place. For me, it's Pennsylvania, and that's the area I want to portray. But, don't say like, oh, hey, I want to model the Rocky Mountains and the Pacific Northwest. Or, I guess you could do that. But don't say like, hey, I want to do railroading in the center of the country. I want to model, the Great Plains or whatever. But I also want to model the Northeast. It's just not going to work out that well unless you have this like gigantic basement where you could spread that out. I just don't think it would look right, but that's just my preference. So like I said, pick an era, pick a place, have a budget. Okay. I only buy structures then that fit into an era and fit into the place that I'm trying to model. Which gets me to basically focus my building on the buildings I purchase on city scenes. I'm not going out and spending all kinds of money on, as much as I'd like to, on some of the fine scale miniatures kits that are now all out of production, but you can find them on eBay. But I do have some of those boxes laying around, and they're probably things that I'm going to eventually put up for sale and use that money for something else. I do like building structures. It's one of my favorite things to do, but those buildings just don't fit in with what I'm trying to model. The next one is track plan. Come up with a track plan. If you or if you're like me and you have no idea where to even start on a track plan, look at, pick up a copy of Model Railroad Planning. I think you could still probably find the 2021 edition. 2022 will be coming out in January sometime. But pick up a magazine. Go on the Model Railroaders website, where they have a track plan database, or if you know somebody who has a railroad that you really like, start picking their brain. Say, hey, what did you like about, or what do you like about your railroad? What would you change if you could do it again? I've got two guys I know that have really, really big railroads. I got a track plan. Actually, it came out of one of the model railroad plannings many, many years ago. About I think it was around 2015 or 16, something like that. And I saw it. It was for Pennsylvania. It was for the PRR. The guy that designed it is a PRR modeler. It was designed as a small switching layout. I didn't have that much space. And really take your space into consideration when you're track planning. That was why I ripped down the last three, the last three railroads that I built, was because of the pure fact that I was trying to cram 10 pounds of you-know-what into a 5-pound bag. It's really easy to want to do. I wanted a steel mill, and I wanted a waterfront scene, and I wanted a small town, and I wanted this, and I wanted that, and I wanted a big yard with a big coaling tower, and the list goes on and on and on. But if you make a track plan, it helps to avoid all those costly mistakes. The other three railroads or whatever that I built before this one, never saw it to completion. In fact, this is probably, this railroad is by far the furthest I've gotten, because usually I would start ripping up track because I never had a plan. I would just like, oh, it looks like I could put a piece of track here, or I need a piece there, or whatever. Avoid doing that if you can. Try to find a track plan, have somebody look it over. There's plenty of Facebook groups out there that'll lend you a hand, that'll tell you different things. They'll look at your track plan. It doesn't have to be on fancy software. Just sketch it out on a piece of paper. Whatever it takes to get you started. And decide, do I want to do operations? Do I just want to sit here in my basement and turn the power on, turn my locomotive on, and basically rail fan on my layout? Maybe you want to do both, and that's okay too. But if you're anything like me, which I'm sorry if you are, if you're anything like me, you wanted the operation aspect of building a model railroad. I don't enjoy just watching trains on somebody's layout. I like to control trains. I like to switch cars. I like to simulate what railroading really is in real life. After all, that's why I spend so much time trying to build my structures to mimic real life, is because I want my trains to seem real. When somebody comes into my basement, I want them to say like, wow, this takes me back to whenever, or this makes me think of whatever, or just, hey, this is really cool. But remember that you're building it for you. The first three layouts that I started building, I never liked because they were basically glorified racetracks. They were loops. I tried the stack loops. I tried to do a dog bone. I just didn't want continuous running. It never made me happy. And a lot of my space was taken up by having loops. To have a 22-inch radius loop, it takes you, 44 inches of real estate. And that's real estate that I just didn't want to waste on having a train go in a circle. I just never liked that look. And that's something that's totally up to you. What is it that you like? After all, it's your railroad. The last tip I can tell you is this. Start. Start doing something. Go to a local hobby store. Buy a kit that you think that you like. Start building it. Make mistakes on it. Don't go buy the, $100 or whatever crazy big building if you haven't built a kit yet. Go buy something small. Whether it's from City Classics or DPM or Walthers or whatever. Maybe you're like me and you wanted to get in the Craftsman structure building. I went and bought some small kits from Bar Mills. You can buy them on their website. If it's not a limited run kit, you can buy them at your local hobby store. Whatever the case might be, get out there and start modeling. That's the only way that you're ever going to do this, that you're ever going to make this a hobby. Don't be an armchair modeler. Get out there. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Buy some cheap kits. Buy some cheap freight cars. And just start to model. Start to dream it. Start to plan it. And, just start making a railroad. If this is something that you like, which obviously you do, or else you wouldn't be watching the video, but start modeling, start building. Get out there and, buy some kits, start getting, look at pictures. You can find a gazillion pictures on the internet. Like I said, pick an era, pick a place, have a budget, start making a track plan, and there's a million people out there that'll help you with that track plan. And finally, just start building. That's what you have to do to get going. There's no other way that's going to happen. Don't get into the as Mike Rose says on one of my favorite podcasts, don't get into analysis paralysis. Don't spend so much time analyzing don't analyze stuff so much. Don't plan so much that you don't even ever start building. Make a plan, stick with it, start building some bench work. My tip to you is, on top of everything else, is plan for expansion. When I show you my railroad here within the next however many videos, however many weeks, you'll see that all of my track ends towards the end of the bench work, and that's for the time where I might expand the size of my layout someday. You don't have to write that off. You can always build more bench work. One of my friends always says, he calls it my political boundaries, which basically means that my wife won't let me build any bigger than what I have right now. So if you're in that same scenario, find the place that you can realistically take over, because that's basically what you're doing, whether it's in a basement or spare bedroom or whatever. Figure out this is how much space I have, and this is what will realistically fit in that space and still look good. You can look at some of the micro layouts and stuff that are out there. A model railroad can happen in a very small amount of space. I consider my railroad small, but you can go even smaller than what I have right here behind me. If you could build a layout in 2x6 space and it look extremely realistic, and it'd be extremely fun to build and to operate. So get out there, start planning, start coming up with a budget, pick your era, and stick with it, and by all means start model railroads. Till next time, guys, happy railroading.